Hey there, it's Christine, and welcome back to Grief Uprooted. I have been using or coined the phrase, your friend walking beside you on the path from grief to growth. I want to ask you a question before we start today's episode. What if the path gets muddy? What if you don't really realize that what you're going through is causing you grief? Hmm. In today's episode, we're going to actually look at caring for yourself while you're caring for your aging parents. We often look at grief as a process of losing somebody who has died, a process of coming to an acceptance and an understanding of a person, being, or thing that we will never see again. But what happens when we're caring for somebody or we're trying to care for somebody and they don't quite want that and they're struggling with the fact that they're aging too? There's so many questions around this topic. So we're going to jump in. We're going to explore 10 essential things you can do to take care of yourself. And that in turn will help you to take care of your aging parents. But before we start today's episode, I just want to let you know that my team has been developing and working hard at bringing you robertspress.com. This website is actually going to carry a lot more resources, a lot more variety of resources for Canada's Grief Resource Center. So I'm super excited that it will be launching most probably next week. We'll be testing it out. Robertspress.ca is still live and running for you to order your grief resources and your products. But I'm excited to have robertspress.com come out. It's a lot more updated and will give you a lot more options. Yeah, so that is very exciting. Also, griefuprooted.com now has all of the podcast episodes on there. So if you visit griefuprooted.com and just click on podcast, you'll see an array of buttons that you can choose if you want to watch it on YouTube, Spotify, TikTok. All of the social media channels are right there. Because I know so many of you have said, I can't find it here, or I don't have Spotify, or I don't have this account. So all the links are there. Just click the button for whatever way you love to watch your podcast. And so let's dive in right now. Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award-winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. I want you to just take a moment and think about your childhood. Did you ever at once in that childhood think, I'm going to have to take care of my parents? I don't think I ever thought about, what am I going to do with my parents? They were my caregivers. And it never crossed my mind, especially in my teenage years, that I would one day have to take care of my parents, make decisions with them, assist them in those decisions. And I know a lot of you may be thinking about your parents and going, oh no, like they make decisions, they're firm in decisions. And these are people who made decisions for us. And then you learn that now they're seeking out your help in making those decisions. And some of our parents don't seek out our help, but we want to step in and help. This is a form of grief that not a lot of people recognize. When I started in my career 24 years ago, I was introduced to Doug Manning. And Doug had an array of books that he wrote on the nursing home decision. This was a topic that I never even considered, never even thought of. But as the distributor in Canada for insightbooks.com, that's a great site if you want to visit it, insightbooks.com. Doug really showed me that, yeah, eventually I may have to take care of my parents. I may have to assist them in these decisions. So, really, distributing these books and working with the older generation had introduced me to um, old age homes and nursing home decisions. And it was a whole other world that was filled with grief, but in a different way. Um, Parts of it you felt, wow, good for these people that they're making these decisions and really downscaling everything they have and moving into a place with friends and having their dinners made for them, having a housekeeper come in. Um, but as I started to work with the families, I realized that grief was pretty heavy because it to the families it was one step closer. It's horrible to say, I guess, but it's true. And they were watching their parents age, and it was hard to accept. So, in looking at all of that, I noticed that the people who are caring for their aging parents often didn't realize the impact it had on them. They really just focused on their aging parent. They wanted to give back to those parents and they wanted to be by their side. But what is the impact on you? What's the impact on the individual that wants to help their parents? So there's a few things to consider in here. And Doug Manning, the nursing home decision, elder care, he has an array of books on this. And um, it's a great resource because there really isn't a lot written on this. Um, but we need it. And we need to understand that this is a form of grief that we don't necessarily recognize. And sometimes we don't even want to recognize it. We don't even want to look at it because if your parents are aging, that means you're aging. So I had the opportunity actually to accompany a girlfriend to an old age home. And it was really just a retirement community. And her mom was making a decision to move into the retirement community. And she felt like she was unsure if she would know what questions to ask. So she brought me along. And as you all know, I'm not shy. So I asked all the questions. And some of the questions I wanted to ask was, and to take in, I guess we should put this in perspective. I started my career 24 years ago. So adult retirement living was so much different than it is today. And this was not making the nursing home decisions such as dementia has entered in, um, memory loss. Mind you, these are things that her mom was experiencing, but they hadn't entered into this realm. I do know that when we're dealing with older adults with dementia, um, Alzheimer's, all sorts of things, this complicates taking care of our parents, really complicates so many things for grief and what we're experiencing. But in this case, I just want to clarify that her mom was old and the memory loss was there, no longer wanting to reside in her home and wanting to join um, an adult living community where food is made, housekeeping is there, activities are provided, somebody there to drive them back and forth to medical appointments. Um, Really, it's wonderful if you can afford this. It's wonderful if your parents have this within their retirement finances. So as we entered in, of course, I had to mingle and talk to people and see what it was like. But during our meeting, some of the questions that I really wanted to explore was um, the emotional the emotional support given to the aging parent who is moving from that home and moving into really. a retirement community that is going to assist them in living a healthy and social life. And I was surprised that there were programs to help them integrate into that. On the table, which I laughed, was an elephant. And when I opened the flyer, it was a flyer with a big elephant on it. It was like, how do you start this conversation? How do you have the conversation with your parents to say, hey, um, are you considering one of these? Are you considering going into adult living? A lot of times, it is wonderful when the parent comes to that decision on their own or they want to talk to you about it. And in this decision processing, um, I really was curious about a lot of things. And some of them were what happens when they move into the home and they fall in love again? And I know that my girlfriend was absolutely mortified that I even went there, but I was like, how many times have elderly people moved in here in their 70s, 80s, even 90s and met somebody and their love life was rekindled? And the answer was surprising. It was like a lot of times. So it gives hopes to people such as myself who are 52 that it still can happen at that age. But these are things you're looking at and going, yeah, like what if your parent moves in here and this happens? That's actually a beautiful thing, I would assume, but also could be very complicated. Yeah. So then it was into where and how will you process this? And that's what I was starting to notice in my friend because it was all fun and games walking around the building, looking at what they offered and, going, wow, you get your meals made, you have all these in-house friends, you have this support. It was really, at one point I said, it looks like a Disney hotel because it was brightly colored and it has all these things and all these services. But when we really started to talk about it, I started to notice, even within myself, was she ready for this? And it really caused me to reflect on my own parents and, how would I handle this? And I started to see, the mind working. And after our visit, we went for a cup of tea, and then the phone call started to go back and forth. And it was like, okay, yeah, like this is this is real. And this is when I started to go, okay, let's go back. Let's go back to looking at those books by Doug Manning on elder care, the nursing home decision. This is when you wake up. This is when no one really explores this topic until they have to. So, some of the things that I did a little digging up and looking at and came up with 10 essential things as you, as the caregiver of these aging parents and making these decisions, need to kind of step back and make sure you're caring for yourself. So, we're going to go back to the crazy old analogy when we're in the airplane and the airplane is going down, you make sure you put the mask on yourself before you place it on the child or your elder parent. Why? Because you need to be stable. You need to be able to make some solid decisions and be of support to them. So, the very first one is to acknowledge the emotional toll. And I honestly think that's the hardest one because it reminds me of my career so very much to recognize that this has an emotional toll on you, that choosing a home for your parent and walking in there or having the conversation of like, how do I bring up the conversation with my parents to say, do you want to stay in your home or are you looking at moving to adult living or senior living? What's your plan? And it's hard enough. We had some guests on talking about the will and asking your parents to write a will or having a will before you die. But imagine now approaching them and saying, what do you want to do? Do you want to live here for the rest of your life? And if you do, how are you going to put in those resources? Or do you actually want to go look at senior living? And you have to recognize even having that conversation is going to cause you emotional toll. You are still going to bring up your childhood. And we all know that our childhood experiences have formed who we are as adults. And when we hit um, really old age, I guess, when our children have moved out and we are on our own again, a lot of times we reflect back onto our childhood and our long-term memory becomes very solidified, and that long-term memory clicks in. And so you start thinking about, well, we're going to move mom or dad into a senior living environment. um, that emotional toll, just having the question, just being able to say, okay, how do I bring this up, and then having to find some places to search out and look at, and then taking them for the visit and preparing them for the visit and being ready to answer repeated questions and to be ready to support them in these decisions. It's exhausting, but it's a good exhausting. It is one where you're supporting a loved one and you are there with them, but you need to recognize that that's exhausting. It's exhausting for these decisions to be made, and it drums up a lot of emotions for you. So you really want to recognize that this is a form of kind of burnout that can happen where you're ruminating on the emotions of a child and what it was like. And now we're having to place them in a senior living lifestyle, or you're having to put in some services into their homes if they choose to stay in your childhood home. Um, and the next one is to set realistic expectations. And really, what we want to look at here is, what is mom and dad capable of? If they want to stay in their home, is that really realistic? If they want to go into senior living, think about it. Is that realistic? You would say yes. You would say, well, yeah, that would be a great place. Why wouldn't anybody want to go in there if they could afford it? What if your parent loved gossip? What if your parent was one who was argumentative? What if they just didn't want to be there? They much prefer to live on their own and have that style of independence. But that means a lot more visits to the house, a lot more services needed to come in home. But all of these things you have to look at. And that is one of the things in my industry when you're providing resources or you're providing trainings and services for these type of organizations, you start to really realize how this brings grief to one person. This causes grief to the individual that is caring for their aging parents. And one of the other things I want to touch on with realistic expectations, and when we listen back through the podcast to individuals who have cared for aging parents who ultimately had died, a lot of it is the toll it had on themselves and then bringing that home to their family. So going home to your husband, your wife, your children, and being exhausted from trying to make these heavy decisions. So that lends me into um, the next one. So first, second, and our third is to create that supportive network. That really needs to happen. And I know in today's society, we have Meetup, we have Facebook. You can get the great books on it. Even at the old age homes or senior living, they have a lot of groups right there for you as a child of an aging parent that you can meet up with other people and just discuss how it's going for you. That supportive network not only allows you to emotionally handle what's happening and to be able to kind of process things, it gives you a gateway to some other services, right? And what people are doing with their aging parents and what you can maybe implement for your parents. So it's not just always about the emotional aspect of it. There are so many different services out there, and it gives you a network of friends. So why not? And I think a lot of times we don't do this when we have aging parents, because every time you ask somebody about grief, or it's kind of a pet peeve I have, if you were to say, well, how are your parents? Oh, I'm caring for my aging parents. And, they just, everybody goes down in their voice. When we really look at it, you're caring for your aging parents. What a blessing. What a blessing to be able to offer this to your family. And I understand there are people out there that do not like their parents and they are not providing that. And you have the ability to set those boundaries. And if they are healthy for you, that is okay. But that is also another avenue of this. You are aging and you may have aging parents that are difficult, and that's hard. So it's even more important to look at these 10 steps and make sure they're implemented. So, number one was acknowledge the emotional toll. And if your aging parents and that grief is complicated, you need to make sure you manage that emotional toll. The next is the realistic expectations. Don't have these huge expectations of yourself or your aging parents. Third was establish a support network. And then we're going to move into prioritizing your own health. I know what you're thinking. She's going to talk about self-care, get a manicure, get your hair done, go to the spa, do yoga. No, I'm not at all, not at all, because those things actually at some point insult you when you're grieving. You get frustrated. I get frustrated when people are like, take some time for yourself. What does that mean? And really, when it means take time for your health and your needs, prioritize your own health, what I'm talking about is not go off to the spa, not go off and get your nails done or a fancy dinner. What I'm talking about is really look at yourself. Look at your aging parents and look at yourself. Do you need to go for shingles shot, pneumonia shot? I signed up after my last episode of COVID. Yeah, going for the pneumonia one for sure. But you have to look at yourself and go, what what do you need to prioritize? Possibly look at your diet. Your all sorts of areas of your health and what you want to improve, where you want to be cautious, and what you want to take note of. And when we're talking about health, we're not just talking about the emotional part of it, we're talking about your physical body. And your physical body is carrying your grief. So you really want to look, and you can take note of that. You can actually make a doctor's appointment too and say, hey, these are the things that are hereditary in my family. And I want to make sure that I'm prepared for this. Is there anything I can do that would be preventative, such as shots, such as maybe decreasing my sugar intake? Could be 1,001 different things here. But when we talk about health, we're not just talking about mental health. We're talking about the physical body. A lot of times we refer to grief and we think it is just mental health. No, our physical body grieves. Our physical body holds this. In saying that, we move into mental health. Make sure to be able to talk to that support network, be able to ruminate out loud. And ruminating is just talk, 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 talk. And as you talk things out, you start to let things go. You start to be able to see things a little bit clearer. You gain a better understanding and educate yourself. That's the best part of that. Educate yourself. Look at senior living. Look at ways that your parents can stay in the house. Look at ways that you possibly could be jumping back to your childhood and those memories are coming forward. Really just take the time to really think about those things and write them down. Journal. Best way to do is to journal and answer some, pivotal questions for yourself. What can I do for my own health? Where can I find a support group? What can I do for my mental health? And make sure you separate mental from physical, because those are two aspects that intertwine with grief. I know a lot of times we just want to say mental health, but it affects you physically. The next is to take regular breaks. um, you, we can consume ourselves or throw ourselves into our aging parents and want to do everything perfectly for them, wanting to be able to provide them everything. And when we do that, sometimes we forget about our lives, we forget about our careers, we overload ourselves with responsibility, and sometimes we get into the mode where we want to do everything. We know what's best for them. But really, they've aged and they have a lot of wisdom sitting there that we could pull from. And we want to be able to ask some pivotal questions like, Mom and Dad, what do you want? Do you want to write this down for us? Do you want to sit down for lunch and let's talk about what are your expectations? What are you wanting? A lot of times people want to talk about themselves. So sitting down with your parents and saying, tell me what you want. Tell me what your needs are. You'd be surprised how open they would be and how much they'll share with you and tell you. Again, this is different from parents that may have dementia, Alzheimer's, all those areas. We need to seek out medical help. So, a lot of times, having somebody come in who specializes in dementia and Alzheimer's and creating a case plan with them alongside. Early in my career, this was something that I would help out in being able to do case plans in the aspect of grief and helping that family really go through the integration process of their loved ones aging and struggling with that result of dementia and Alzheimer's. Then we got to move into maintain social connection. And I think this is huge because what happens when we go through grief of any kind, we tend to withhold or withdraw, not withhold, but well, I guess withhold from talking or texting, but we withdraw from people because it seems to have a stigma with it that, I don't want everybody to know I'm grieving. Sometimes we want to withdraw. I find that in my career, I will pull back when I'm working on things or I'm trying to figure things out or processing some of the experiences I have in my career. And especially with Grief Uprooted, hearing some of the stories, I tend to go for a walk right after recording so that I can let that all go and process what I've just experienced and heard. And and I think that is one of the key things in maintaining social connection is people help. We don't heal alone. We never have and we never will, and we heal together. So when you're going through this struggle and you don't share it with anyone, you're isolated. You start to feel melancholy where you become profusely sad because this is all you're exposing yourself to. You want to open that up. You want to maintain that regular friendship or maintain that regular outing you had. It really brings you some comfort to know that, yeah, you're assisting your parents in their aging process, but your life is still there. Your life is still stable and you're able to still enjoy it. Um, and to make time for those other relationships. So if this is creeping in and you're like, I don't get the time to go out with my children, I don't get the time to be with my spouse, just explain that to them and then say, I need to actively make an appointment so that I can do this. I can be with you. And I think it's a great way because you maintain those relationships, and that gives you the ability to feel that respite of constantly talking about aging and caregiving for somebody else. Another one, and this one really helps in I find this even in my career, in working in grief and trauma, is stay organized. And, you know, be able to help your parents in that too, and take pride in those small wins when I say stay organized. And what I mean by that, that's where this journal comes in great, to be able to give your parents the opportunity to write down what their expectations are, or what they want to do, or what they want to talk about. I find I take notes on my phone And if I'm talking to a client, which you now are the coach of your parent, and when you're sitting there, just take notes. Like what are they saying? So, mom wants to go into um senior living, but wants to make sure it's close to us, or wants to make sure that it is a new facility, wants to make sure there is enough space for her dog, all sorts of things. You want to make sure you jot all these things down and be able to look at all that. And I think it's fantastic when you're able to create a chart, because a lot of times when we're elderly, pictures are the best way to go. It's a chart, it's organized. It actually relieves you when you're capable of putting your emotions and your needs down on paper. Because one thing you actually have to look at is, how do you plan on doing all this too? Because you're going to have to take time out of your day if you place your parents in a senior living environment, and you need to be able to take some time to go visit them. You may need to implement that into your life. What if that was never in your life? What if your parents lived far away and all of a sudden they move close to you? What if they want to move into your home? That's a completely different story. But again, another form of caring for our aging parents. So we really want to make sure that we keep some organization for our own mental stability, and also helps with them. And then when we have repetitive conversations, which quite often happen, you have something to pull out and say, hey, last time we talked, I wrote it down. This was your wishes. Is that changing now? And if that wish changes drastically, you'll be able to go back through your notes and say, okay, 75% of the time, you wanted to go into senior living. 75% of the time, or what is that? 25% of the time, you want to stay in your home. So let's reevaluate and go from there. So, really, when we get back to all of this, and I want to introduce you to number 10, and that's embrace self compassion. You might ask yourself, how is that any different than acknowledging the emotional toll? But it is significantly different. It is one thing to acknowledge that the situation you're going through is emotionally heavy, but it is completely another thing to embrace self compassion. And how would you describe self compassion? It's really understanding that you're not perfect, and understanding that when you become frustrated with the decision process, and your parents become frustrated with that process, that just to have compassion for yourself, that you're human, and that this is grief, that this isn't an easy decision for anyone. This is a time of change, a time of evolving to a new normal. And all of those things not only impact you, they impact your parents. And often there's one person in the family that is taking care of the aging parents. So it is great when you can have that self compassion for other children or other siblings you may have, and invite them in on that decision process. I know this can turn into an utter nightmare. Um, and you see it when someone dies and the reading of the will comes out. You see it when somebody gets sick and all the children get together and decisions have to be made. But having the self compassion that this is a hard thing to be going through. So, looking at the emotional toll, acknowledging number one, but in the end, making sure you realize that, yeah, it's exhausting and you're doing the best you can do. You really are. And this type of grief is an ongoing living grief for a living human being. And those stages or integration of this process is something that's proceeding and moving forward every day. So just really sometimes going, yeah, this is hard to handle. Just understanding it, trying to understand the process, talking to friends about it. Those are the simple things that you may need to get you through today and move you to the next day. But understand that you need to do that and understand that that's grief. So many times we think of grief just as death, but sometimes it can be heavier before that individual dies. And it's okay to stop and understand that and feel that and accept that and even cry with that. These people took care of us. These people cared for us since the day we were born, adopted, biological, however it may be. These people cared for us when we were children. And some of them did a great job, and some of them did a really shitty job. But you might be at this stage where you need to assist them in the aging process. So, just to recap, number one, acknowledge the emotional toll. Number two, set realistic expectations. Three, establish a support network. If you do that with your siblings, that would be great. Prioritize your own health, not only your mental health, your physical health. Take regular breaks. Be able to walk away and just exhale sometimes. Maintain your social connections. Educate yourself as best you can. Set boundaries and say no. This one we didn't touch on, but being able to say, no, this is not going to work into my life is huge and can cause a lot of friction. But sometimes we need to make sure we're placing ourselves in an important role and not giving too much. As caregivers, we can burn out. You can give away so much that you're incapable of saying no, and then you're running and doing and constantly being called upon. You want to make sure that you have the ability to reset perfectionism. And that I'm saying is, as caregivers, you can't always be there. Um, Look at what you can provide and the value that that brings. Number nine, the stay organized as best as you can and bring your parents in on that one. And number 10 is embrace your self compassion. I really wanted to touch on this subject because we really need to start looking at all the forms of grief. And caring for our aging parents is definitely a form of grief. There are people out there that are called young caregivers. There's actually a whole organization, and it is for young children who are caring for their ill parents. This organization is amazing. And working with those their youth actually, and children, working with those young children and youth, um, they showed me a whole other aspect of what it's like to care for somebody who really was your caregiver at one time or should be caring for you. I learned so much from those children and youth, and I value that lesson so much. But as we are aging adults and having to take care of our aging parents, we need to recognize the toll that this places on us. And we need to understand that this is a process of grief, but also a process of great growth and change. And it can be one that is beautiful. It can be one where you're celebrating this move with your loved ones and you're working together and you see how much your aging parents really appreciate it. And I think that's one of the biggest things. They just appreciate those visits. They appreciate you standing up and helping them. So even though they may never say it, even though they may never acknowledge how much of an assistance you have been and how much they love you, just know that caring for our aging parents is definitely grief driven, grief ridden, but it is also love ridden and love driven, meaning the opposite of grief is love. And it is awesome when we can walk that journey together with our parents and be able to provide that guidance and love. Take care, everybody. And as usual, it is only together that we can heal. And it is only together that we can grieve. Take care. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.